I'm from the Netherlands. I was born and raised here. Yeah, from a young age, I was always sort of drawing, painting, and always very visual. And then, like, I was 12 years old, and I got from my grandmother for my birthday my very first camera, a small Agfa clock, which you cannot do really much with, like literally say clock, and it takes a picture. And I was kind of totally, yeah, in love with it from day one. After a week, I think I traded it in for a better camera, and it kind of never stopped. So um, I went to art school here in the Netherlands, and for yeah, a couple of years did more documentary photography. I worked with a publisher in New York, doing all kind of different things. It didn't really had sort of my focus, what yeah, what my path would be in photography so much.
So when you were a kid and you got the first camera, it only took a week before you traded it in for something better.
Yeah.
And obviously your focus sort of now is more on the more to do with architecture in a documentary kind of style. But at the young age of a kid, I presume you weren't shooting. Were you shooting architecture when you started, or was it?
No, my architecture career started much later. Actually, that came all a little bit by accident. No, as a kid, you're sort of photographing your surroundings, my brothers, my family. Like I was biking every day, an hour to school and an hour back.
Wow.
And that's like I had my camera on the way with me, the landscape pictures, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
At a certain point, I was, I think, 16, 17 years old. I built my own camera. So I was always like, yeah, trying to tweak and make it better, and work with these technologies to kind of find a way to, yeah, do my photography things.
I presume, I don't know the dates, but I presume from, when the age of 12 all the way through high school or whatever the equivalent is in the Netherlands, this was all film, right? Like, were digital cameras even?
Yeah. No, that was later, like kind of towards the end of art school, digital really started, and I was really, fascinated with that technology from kind of day one. I finished art school in '98.
Okay.
So all before was all analog photography. I had my own dark room, developed black and white, color, everything. So it was made my own cameras, the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Wait, made your own cameras?
Yeah, with don't you do like a small aperture with a pin?
Oh, right.
I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, of course, like the pinholes, but then like I actually. Like I did the Waldorf school as a kid, which is like also a lot about creativity. And then in your last year, you have to sort of invent a project for yourself where you work kind of a whole year on. So for me, that was like, I'll do something with photography. So, and want to bring it a step further. So I built actually like a large 4x5-inch view camera, and so went all in with that. So
that's cool. So you're talking about your last year in high school, whatever.
Yeah.
I see. I see. So it's pretty clear photography was a passion, right?
Yeah.
And then you go to school at the Royal Academy of Art, and that was specifically to study photography.
Photography, yeah, and also still like I knew photography was it for me, but I didn't really had to focus on that, like this subject matter or like this I wanted to bring out to the world. So that kind of happened much later. I was always very interested in documentary photography. For me, this was always like a great excuse to kind of see places and things and people you would otherwise not really meet or start to work with. So that was for me sort of my first path, and that took some years, and then kind of by total accident, I fell into the whole architecture field. But that's all, another story.
I mean, it's an interesting thing because the kind of documentary approach to shooting photography is, of course, very different from, let's say, shooting portraits in a studio in a very, very controlled environment. And obviously there's photographers who go very different routes to even like event photographs, like weddings and whatnot. Do you have a sense of like why you veered toward the documentary thing? Is it because you just enjoyed going to different places and seeing things in a different way, as opposed to being in a studio all day?
Yeah, like I did some studio work also. Like I did an apprenticeship with a fashion photographer. I dabbled on many different parts. Like as I said, I didn't came out of art school with the idea of this is what I'm going to do. So I tried out many things, but I think that curiosity is a big driver for me. It's always been a big driver for me. So, to go places, document places, people, and these kind of interactions were always very important for me.
Did you used to travel a lot as a kid or as a teenager?
No, that's funny. Like my parents were like they moved quite a bit, but all within the Netherlands, which is like this tiny, basically.
It's small.
Yeah. And then like holidays were like car trips to France, to Switzerland, and things like that. But I think I took my first plane like I was probably 18 or 19 years old, and never stopped basically after that.
I'm kind of curious about the transition from film to digital, because you were mentioning that the timeline was such that maybe digital cameras were sort of becoming more prevalent in the later years during your education, or you started using them more at that time. How was that like received? Because I feel like some photographers, maybe at that time in particular, would have a very strong opinion about shooting film versus digital.
Totally. Yeah. No, of course, it was really the early days of digital. I did one of my apprenticeships here with a photographer in the Netherlands who had like this first sort of total digital studio. Like it were these cameras of $60,000, and your resolution was basically a quarter of what comes nowadays out of your iPhone.
That's crazy.
So it's like it was a whole different world, of course. Like, but like scanning negatives and so existed already for a bit. So it was kind of this hybrid period also. So I was photographing on film, but scanning film in, and then you could edit and work on it on Adobe Photoshop 1.0 or something like that.
Yeah.
All very, very rudimentary, but like I was totally fascinated by like the technology and really want to discover it. And it, like in my third year of art school, I did you have this year of apprenticeship. First, I was here in the Netherlands. Then I went to New York, and I loved New York. I started to work there also a bit, and I convinced the school that I could do my last year of art school from New York and basically do it all digital. So it was like 97 with dial-up modems and like what else. So like it was of course very basic at the time. But like they agreed, and they said sure, let's do that. And I was allowed to present my whole like final project digitally. So like I made a presentation on the computer, the whole thing.
Wow.
For that time, like in art school, like it was really a first. And then actually on the day of the presentation, kind of half of the teachers basically said like, oh no, we cannot judge a photograph on a computer monitor, so you can come back next year to print them out and do it again, but we're not going to look at this. So they didn't give me my diploma, and I thought like, no one really needs ask me for the diploma. So for me, that was also kind of the end of my art school.
You could probably apply now and do it digitally.
It was all a bit a different time. Like in these art schools, like a certain type of photographers who were teaching there was all still very traditional and very much about the chemical process and all the traditional values of photography. And you still have these people who like swear at analog photography and film and everything. I think the digital for me it was the beginning of a path. Like everything I do nowadays would have been impossible if I would have lived another decade or started another decade earlier.
Right. So the final year, it's a bummer that they would decline your graduation, even though they said you could do it digitally, and then they changed their minds.
Yeah, that's not cool.
They didn't really understand it. I feel like at the time when I asked them.
Sure.
And it was all a bit too early.
So what was the final project you did? Like, was there a focus on...
Yeah, it was a time like there was this bank in Bangladesh, the Grameen Bank. It was a bank. It was one of the first banks who started with microcredit. So they basically gave people $20, $50, which they could pay back over years, where they could buy start a mini business with, buy a few chickens to sell some eggs, and it made a huge transformation there in the country. And I was kind of fascinated by that concept, and I thought it could be an interesting story to follow. So I lived actually in Bangladesh for like 5-6 months almost, and followed many of these things what was happening there in that place, and how people were changing their lives through these kind of microcredits. And like after that it became very big. Like it's happening in many places these days, but for that time it was very unique, and for me it was also a unique insight in a very different world to me as well.
I mean, that's one of the fascinating things, is it's that you must travel really often now. Like, how many days of the year are you traveling, or not home, wherever home is?
Yeah, and it is a little complicated. I have a base here in Amsterdam, and here with my office, where I work with 2 people. But usually I'm very little here. So pre-COVID, I was here literally maybe 2 days a month or so. And now, of course, I'm here a little bit more. I have a family also these days, 2 young kids who we used to take basically everywhere with us. But now in COVID times, that's all a little more complicated. I'm still able to travel through like many cracks and complications, but with the family that's difficult, so we kept Amsterdam a little bit more as a base for the last year and a half.
I see. So tracking the story, so I'll just say you graduate. Screw it. You graduate from the school.
No, I only have my swimming diploma, actually, because I also didn't graduate from high school.
Well, it worked out, it seems. A swimming diploma, that's pretty random.
Very useful.
Yes, super useful.
In the Netherlands, especially. Kids learn that from very early on.
So at what point, or how did you first begin photographing architecture? I mean, I read online somewhere that it started off with a relationship with Rem Koolhaas. Yeah,
that was also kind of by total accident. In 2004, like I had a good friend here from Amsterdam, Lok Jans, who was an architect, illustrator, and he was working at the time with Rem on an exhibition, The History of Europe. This exhibition, which was traveling around, was in Brussels, a kind of large round tent. And I saw him working on that and telling me about it. And I thought, I was at the time also experimenting with some panoramic photography, like the 360 degrees and kind of interactive ways to use photography. Basically what you see nowadays in the Google Street View, but for that time it was quite new. So I thought it could be interesting to use that for this exhibition, to represent it in a different way. I made a little proposal for that. He showed it to Rem, and I was at the time still kind of back and forth between the Netherlands and New York. And I remember I was about to fly back to New York, and he called me up. Oh, can you come today to Rotterdam to show what you're doing? And so I kind of changed my travel plans, went to Rotterdam, and Rem was interested in it. I got sent it a bit around, but it was a very interesting moment for the office also at that time. I had no clue about architecture, basically. But he saw my other work, and I think he saw something in there what he could apply in a different way to architecture. And it was a time, there were a lot of projects finishing at that time, like Seattle, the Public Library, IIT in Chicago, Porto, the Casa de Musica, and Berlin, the Embassy. Mm-hmm. And they were working on this special issue for Domus magazine, and he basically said, "Okay, you fly there and photograph these places." And I said, "Sure." and that's kind of how it started. And from kind of that day, it never stopped, and it suddenly became all architects. Surrounding me.
I was going to ask, when you had made this miniature proposal, did you know who Rem Koolhaas was? I mean, his status in the architecture world? Because all of our listeners, most of them are designers, so Rem Koolhaas is at the top, you know.
Yeah. I knew a little bit, like he's well known here in the Netherlands, also outside the architecture scene, but I, for the rest, no, not really. I had hardly an idea what it entailed.
That's funny. Yeah. So I'm also curious, so between, was it 97 to 2004-ish, you were kind of going back and forth between the Netherlands and New York. So what were you shooting in New York? Was it a myriad, a bunch of different things?
Well, it was different things. So different clients in New York. I was actually working with a publisher packager who made like art books, children's books, and so on, where I was photographing for, but also doing some design. Like, so I said before, like I started pretty young, also like in art school, and I didn't really have a focus, like, and it took sort of everything on I could do in terms of photography, design, bookmaking. In the Netherlands, it was more work with a couple of magazines, some more documentary photography, sometimes assisting other photographers. It was a myriad of things. So really sort of testing out things, and also kind of developing my own fascinations and techniques and things like that, like this panoramic photography, for instance. These things, I was kind of very into it, and it was the start of the whole digital photography, so that it was something like I was really into and trying to develop and work with in kind of every possible way.
So was the photography that you did for Rem Koolhaas the first time that you really realized that you were interested in mostly the interaction within architecture and the people and the scale, or did you have some strong feelings or practice on those things prior to that?
No, like if I felt immediately that it was something like where I could combine a lot of my interest. Kind of unknowingly, I was completely prepared for that moment. Like from my interest in like specific places, in people, like the kind of stories you make as a documentary photographer, also. That I could apply basically all these interests to architecture and use just the building and its piece of architecture as a kind of background, literally, in the photographs I was taking. And it was an interesting moment, of course, also because it was the start of the CCTV construction in China, like I at that time I wasn't in China before, so it was of course a time when a lot of people were talking about China and like all the developments there. So I said to him, like, might be interesting to follow that construction over the years and see what's happening there. He was telling me all these stories on the thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people who are working basically on these construction sites, the migrant workers, the sort of kind of temporary, almost cities built around these construction projects, where all these people come from the countryside, build these kind of amazing buildings. Almost by hand, like it was a sort of whole discrepancy between like almost the handmade quality and the very high tech architecture. And I thought it could be an interesting story. So I went at that time. I started going at that time a lot to China. At moments went there basically every 6 weeks or so.
Wow.
To document the construction. And kind of from one thing came the other. Of course, there was a lot happening in China, and other architects started to notice that work, and kind of that's how it's kind of got a little bit out of hand.
So you said that when you do photography, you kind of use architecture as a background. Is that a difficult exercise not to want to focus on the pretty object that's there? And
right,
I mean, I feel like a lot of people who take photography, like amateur people, right, they focus on the beautiful object on the picture and not so much on like the larger vision.
Yeah, I don't know. Like for me, like it's was something very natural in a way. Like as a photographer, like you're making a kind of composition, of course, within your frame, with the subject matter, people, the background, the foreground, the landscape, the cityscape around it, and so on. So suddenly there came this, a building. Like in a way, architecture is everywhere around us. So like a kind of unknowingly, like I've been like I didn't change my way of photography basically. Also from that moment on, like if I look at my older work, it's still kind of the same interest and maybe the same way I look at things. But suddenly, like I started to see that architects, of course, they also have this desire to make something very special, work with specific angles, perspectives, and so on. So I think, in a way, like it was for me a quite natural transition in a way to start working with architects.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because most of the architectural photographs that I think a lot of people first think of, they exist almost solely to feature the building at the expense of everything else. Like we don't want any people, we don't want any cars. We want perfect sun lighting, perfect shade and shadows, that perfect one-shot perspective that you're kind of describing. And it seems like a lot of the photography you do is there are those elements embedded within the photograph, but there's always this other layer of reality.
Yeah.
No, like for me, like also for the work before, it was always like there has to be a specific reason for me to travel halfway across the world to a place and to describe the place and show how people live there, what they do there, how a place like that is different than like our environment here. So I think like all these values, they were always interesting for me, and then suddenly architects came in between there. But it still was kind of my main reason. Like if I fly to China for a building of Rem, like I didn't know so much about his architecture in a way, like just at the time, but it was also that context and that story around me what fascinated me.
Yeah.
The architecture becomes almost like a way to frame that story and to anchor that story around a specific subject. But then, like I'm at the same time trying to move away from that subject also all the time. It's kind of this, balance you're always in. I feel like. Yeah.
So when you travel to China every 6 weeks to take pictures of more or less the construction workers, were they like, who is this random guy who shows up every 6 weeks to photograph us?
Yeah, like of course my interaction with these construction workers was very limited. They speak purely Chinese and often dialects, and my Chinese is not really existent. So like sometimes you have interactions with them through a translator or so. But it was of course totally fascinating to see that these two giant buildings coming up, a city which was in such an amazing transformation at the time. Each time you come back, whole parts of the city seemed to be gone, others came up, and so on. And it was, of course, the whole run up to the Olympics. So there was a lot happening, and I met Ai Weiwei there also, and he introduced me to Jacques and Pierre, and started working also like on the Olympic Stadium there, the construction. And so there were a couple of these moments where like a lot of things kind of all were happening in that part of the world.
That's really cool. We've been to China a couple times, and it seems like the way, maybe I could be mistaken. I don't know. Maybe it was the jet lag, but I feel like when they construct a building, there's a lot of people, a lot of Chinese people, obviously, and they have like bamboo scaffolding, and there's just a gajillion of them, and it is weird because it seems to be that they rely maybe more on manpower than maybe other places, and the entire buildings would kind of disappear and they get erected with this these ants of people just scurrying around.
Not totally, and especially at that time, like nowadays, it gets also more high tech. I think the whole building industry, but especially at the time, like there was this big difference between sort of the everyday life. People still, mostly transported, going around on bicycles, on foot, and so on. The construction work, which was, as you said, like not so much Beijing actually. It was more further to the south where you have all the bamboo scaffolding. But in Beijing, it was still already the steel scaffolding, but still like anything you could transport with 10 people, and don't transport with a big truck or a crane or so. You would do it with 10 people otherwise. So it felt in a way almost like almost the pyramids being built.
For sure.
So big difference
there. The bird's nest is also just a remarkable structure. I mean, all the structures you mentioned are amazing, but having seen the bird's nest up close and been inside of it, it is massive. It's almost hard to conceive that. I mean, there's a lot of big structures, but it's a massive building.
No, and then that scale of these buildings, of course, and then these thousands of people working there, and then a place where these people live just right next to that, where they have their dinners, they watch TV and so on. It's like everything is there, and it's so condensed, and it seems so chaotic in a way, but at the same time, of course, there's this massive push happening there, which was totally fascinating.
Wait, so were those people like actually living, like sleeping more or less on the site?
Not immediately on the site, like they usually are these all these barracks next to it, but nap times. So middle of the day after lunch, you see all these people laying on the concrete, usually with a block of a stone, like this sort of traditional pillow in China. Often is this wooden or ceramic piece which they put below their head, and it gives some airflow between their neck and the floor, and basically that's a traditional ceramic piece of pillow was replaced by a concrete brick or a piece of steel or so. So that happened like that.
Yeah, super comfortable.
So how much planning do you do before you go on those trips to shoot projects? Like, do you have a list of the picture you're supposed to have? Do you plan a scouting tour of the place before going to, where you're supposed to do the photo shoot? Like, what's your process?
No, not much. I try to sort of enter these places kind of with a sort of blank canvas. Like, I find it always fascinating. I step basically every week in a total different world. It's a total different community and culture, and so I think that's first moment that you come there, like you're super open to all these differences and what makes that place unique. So that's, I feel like, always a big inspiration for me to see. And so like I try not to plan too much in advance, and kind of more be surprised by whatever is there and how what kind of unfolds there. And usually like there's always something in any kind of condition which you anyway cannot really plan for. So it's you have to be open to it and discover these things.
I'm curious, like, how much time do you have to allot to shoot things, especially when you're not, part of the process is not over planning? Like you show up and you're just, you're witnessing things as they happen, you capture moments. Like, is there a minimum amount of time you need in order for that to happen, in case, nothing happens?
No, like it depends, of course, per project and the scale of the project. Like a CCTV, I went countless times to over the years. Others, you feel like you're done in a day or two. So I think it's anything in between. I brought a couple of books here also with me. We can talk later about. For these book projects, you're usually a bit longer in a place, or you come back a couple times to follow it through different seasons or so. So it depends. It's there's no recipe for that. I feel like I'm on a site until I feel like I kind of captured the story and I got it all.
Gotcha. So then, are architects mostly hiring you for that type of photography, or are they also saying, we need to have this one, these specific shots that make the building look attractive, in addition to these other more in the moment documentary style shots? Yeah,
no, like luckily, maybe because I carved my path out in such a way, like, and I was always doing this, like, I'm luckily in a position that like most architects kind of just say like, go there and we'll see what you come back with. And I feel like architects often, like, they've worked for so long on a project, they know they have, so there's sort of their ways to look at it and their favorite things. I feel like it's also very important for someone else to have a different look at it and a kind of fresh slate. And usually, like, the things an architect really designed for, like, they're there, they stand out, and like I'll see them as well. I don't need a shot list for that. Right. So it's then, like, I feel like I'm very more open to all these kind of impromptu things which you can't really plan for anyway.
Yeah. Is it only you, or do you have like an assistant, a crew? Like, how big is the operation here?
No, like for the photography, it's just me. I work with a small handheld setup most of the time. I'm always kind of trying to make my setup as lighter and smaller, whatever is possible with kind of the highest technological standards. So you try to be kind of a fly on the wall in these moments and not be so present as a photographer. I think that opens up also like all these unexpected moments which you otherwise like looked at as a photographer, like what are you doing here, why are you here, and so on. So
are you still trading cameras when you travel?
You're still trying to work with whatever is best there, like, so it's non-stop. Like, I just got yesterday the newest Canon again, like that is a kind of non-stop game, because like it's not so much just about the a lot of photographers are technology freaks, but it's also like they allow you to work in a different way. For instance, these cameras become also so incredibly light sensitive that you can work like under near darkness, still handheld and so on. So with these kind of things, like you're always sort of trying to be on top whatever is possible in the market at that moment.
So are you more of a Canon guy or a Nikon guy? I have to ask the question.
I was for a long time a Nikon guy, but I think probably around the time I moved to architecture as working with architects, I kind of moved over to Canon, who was at that time, like in 2004 or 5, like really on top of the especially the sensors, which are basically the most important part of a camera, which capture the light, which capture your photograph, which they developing themselves, and they stay very much on top of that. So it's for me kind of the most important part of the camera.
So what other technological advances in Cambers have shaped your work? You mentioned I mean, it's been a while since I've shot anything, but I assume like the ISO level is probably insanely high now, which allows you to shoot in really dark.
Totally, yeah. So I feel like that's been for me always something I really try to push. You might remember I have it here on the wall also. I don't know if you can see it, the New York image there. That image, like it was also like a moment that I literally got a week before. At that time, it was 2012, the newest Canon high-end DSLR camera, which was for that time like incredibly sensitive. Like that shot, I couldn't have made. If that would have happened like a week or 10 days earlier. Like I had that camera, I had technology, that moment happened. I felt like, for me, that was kind of the most logic way to show the city in that unique moment where the city was half dark and you're basically photographing without light from a moving, vibrating helicopter. So you need kind of incredibly sensitive sensor and vibration reduction. So all these kind of moments come together, and I feel like in a way that moment that I met Rem, I was also like kind of unknowingly totally prepared for a different world I would step into. And maybe with this picture of New York, that was also like was kind of unknowingly also completely prepared to take the picture. And then you get that. And it was of course also an event which was there just for a couple days, and then the photograph came out on the day that the electricity went back on, and no one else had that shot, and that sort of was also an important milestone in a way.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I remember that shot because we were living in New York when that happened, and I saw the picture and I was like, wow, this is insane. Like, how often are you going to see, downtown like that? Like, once in a blue moon.
Wait, so did you go on the helicopter specifically to take that shot, or?
Yeah, like I had actually arrived in New York for a job for Herzog and de Meuron. They were opening that week the Parrish Art Museum, this new museum in the top tip of Long Island. So I flew to New York to photograph that. Of course, Sandy happened. I got stuck in my hotel on the 10th floor in New York. Didn't have anything to do. I walked a little bit around in the city. But it was of course an insane moment. I photographed a bit from the ground, but then I felt immediately the only way to really show that absence of light, which you see dark streets, but you can't really show that contrast so much of like where there's light and where not. It's basically shooting it from the sky. So I called the pilots where I usually work with in and around New York, but no one was able to fly. Most of the airports there, like heliports close to New York, were also closed because there was no electricity and so on. So it was kind of by accident again that I had this pilot lined up all the way out in Long Island, who was going to help me to shoot the Parish Art Museum, which I couldn't do at that moment. But I called him, and he still could fly, and I had a rental car, which I had anyway, like to drive out to Long Island for the Herzog and de Meuron project. So kind of all these things kind of lined up, and so I drove out to Long Island to the heliport where this guy was. We flew back to New York. I took that shot, I showed it to a New York magazine, and they put it on the cover for the next issue, which then came out on the day that the lights basically came on again. And since then, its image has made the rounds, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. I'm surprised you were able to get in a helicopter. I feel like given New York City and its history with 9/11, they would have grounded everything in like a 15-mile radius, except for you and your helicopter flying around.
Totally, yeah. No, but that's so strange. Like helicopters, all these regulations, they're totally different anywhere in the world. But the US, of course, I think there's such a big aspect of private aviation everywhere. Like all the CEOs and the rich and famous all have their own helicopters, planes, and so on. That like always the regulations for private air travel has been extremely open, and like you can call someone up like half an hour before and be up in the sky like an hour later. It's no problem whatsoever anytime, basically, even if the airports are closed. So
Interesting.
So this particular photo was a big milestone for you in your career?
No, it's certainly probably the most published image, and an image which got my name probably also out in a world outside the architects more at that time. And it was again kind of one of those moments that kind of unknowingly you're totally prepared for a moment, and I feel like that's always with photography. Like you have to, like you don't know what you encounter when you fly across the world, but you want to be prepared and present for that moment if it comes to you, and this was definitely one of those. Yeah.
So are you shooting? Oh, actually, a specific question for that photograph. What was the ISO level for that thing? Like, it's a very nerdy question, but I mean,
ISO obsessed.
No, but I mean, it's insane. It's like dark outside, and you have a
Yeah. So that was I think like 16,000 or so, and then which is still like not super high. Like nowadays, these cameras go even higher. But then you're from a vibrating helicopter, so you shoot just an insane amount of images. Like you basically keep the shutter button pressed, and then like 70% is still slightly blurred, even with that high ISO, because you still have to shoot like maybe with a 30th of a second or so. So it's still pretty slow, but then there are once in a while you just sit in that vibration and you have the perfect sharp image. So then it's a lot of work to kind of go through all these images and find that shot which is the one.
Interesting. So are most of the projects you're shooting now, are they architecture, or are there other things you're doing that are maybe slightly different from architecture, but within your interests?
Yeah, I feel like everything is kind of around the built environment these days. Like, there's a part of the commissioned work, of course, which is all for architects, and it's usually their newest building, where it's either publicity, photography, a book, or things around it. But like I like to do these books a lot, and they're usually more on older projects and really show how places, how cities have grown kind of around specifically designed buildings, how also more on the traditional way of building and so on. So it's in a way it's all around the built environment, but sort of the new architecture is a part of that.
Yeah. But it sounds like also, with CCTV, you were mentioned that you would fly out every 6 weeks during the construction of it. But it sounds like that for a number of the projects, you're photographing not just during construction, but then, and not just when the building is complete and it's nice and shiny, but maybe even also the life afterwards, which, can take several years before it gets kind of used by the city or appropriated in different ways.
Totally. Like I find it always interesting. Like architects are such control freaks. Like they plan every little detail and the whole thing. They have it all mapped out. But then, like once people take over, that's for me kind of the most interesting way when, people start to appropriate a place and start to use it in different ways. Maybe as an architect designed it, and that's that moment, that friction point, I think, where things start to happen, which are for me as a photographer also really interesting. And it's the same, like, what does the building do to the city around it? How is the city sort of adapting to that place? What happens around these places? So these books like The Living with Modernity, on Brasilia, Chandigarh, or the African Modernism, they explore really these, like how these buildings survive after 40, 50, 60, 70 years. Mm-hmm. And how those moments that architects designed those projects were also very specific moments in time where they were allowed and where it was possible to create something unique, and where all these circumstances kind of fell into place. And I feel like, in a way, similar as what Rem or Jacques Pierre did in China. It was a very specific moment in time which made these kind of mega structures possible there, which could have only happened at that moment and in that place, and not somewhere else.
So what are some examples of buildings or built environment places that you've been able to photograph where people end up using them in a different way than maybe had been planned for, or the life of the building kind of starts to evolve in a different way after 10, 15, 20 years?
Like of course that book, like on Brasilia Chandigarh, I made it about 10, 11 years ago with Lars Muller. Mm-hmm. And it's this whole visual journey through these two cities. At the time, Brasilia had its 50th anniversary. So we thought it would be interesting to look back at that city and see how it's grown. And like everyone knows that city, of course, from its architectural icons, but kind of also how they're lived in, and how these places really give a shelter. And it's not much about the architecture in a way, like here, like you see the bus station and sort of the intimate moments of people arriving or leaving the city, the highways, the kind of the layout, the way the city was planned, and sort of the enormous amount of cars which are like speckled everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so kind of all these moments where architecture is really kind of the background, and it's much more on like everyday life and how people took these places over. Yeah,
interesting.
And then, we compared that to Chandigarh, India, where that contrast is even, much more visible, like in the Palace of Justice there, like the Corbusier, famous Corbusier building. Like, it's a moment that I was there when they were working on the street in front of it. The construction workers, like, they have a bit of water from the water tank, which is used for the construction, but they also do their laundry there. Like, sort of all these moments are kind of colliding in a way you cannot plan for. You cannot, certainly don't plan as an architect. And I find these kind of moments and these stories very interesting, and like how that architecture still kind of comes through everywhere, but it's also really on these people, like here, all these oath commissioners, a very specific job, the notaries, which are all sitting there, like put up a little desk and sit there in the Palace of Justice, like, for everyone to walk by. And it's, kind of these moments where it's still like it tells a story on the architecture and how people use and appropriate these places, but it's also in a very different way as an architect has ever imagined, probably.
A lot of the things that you're talking about and the kind of issues that you're interested in are maybe more in line with what an urban designer would think of. It's someone who deals more specifically about how people are using larger spaces or structures in a public sense, rather than, I mean, the field of architecture is very broad, as you know, and there's some architects who are like 90% of their passion is just the shape and the texture and the material of the building. But there's this other dimension that you're kind of more focused on, which seems to be more of an urban thinking mindset. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And then what I said before also, like I always try to get away from these buildings and show that context much more. And like for me, it's also a way like, like I'm usually every couple of days somewhere else in the world, and I wake up in the morning and hardly know where I am. So for me, that's also like a way to anchor a building to a place and show that context, and kind of try to tell through stories, through these visual stories, like where a building is located and what makes it unique for that place, and that it's there and not somewhere else, and so on. And like I found it always interesting when I started working with architects, like all their renderings, their drawings, they were always full of people. Then you have the models and all the plans, where you always have this bird's eye perspective, but then you usually saw the architecture pictures of the finished building where people were totally absent. It's only sort of the perfectly framed building and nothing around it, like it could be anywhere in the world. And for me, like those two things were kind of something I was always doing, also these aerial perspectives, and so I was fascinated with. So like those were also both kind of ways, which kind of fell into place when I started working with Rem and others.
Right. So for the book projects, are those like your solo projects that you just do on your own, or is someone commissioning you to do those?
It depends. It's in all kind of different setups. Like often they're collaborations, often with a university or a researcher or an architect on a specific subject, where you have the help of someone very knowledgeable about the place and documenting the place. Sometimes they're more kind of my own projects, like the Brasilia Chandigarh, which I just did with Lars, and then there's purely the commissioned books, like when a building is finished and they ask you to photograph. Like here are some examples from the Qatar National Museum, the Jean Nouvel building. Like they're purely commissioned books, but still, like I feel with a book, you can tell a much broader story on a project than what usually goes out to just the press and the few images which are kind of selected by an architect as kind of the final images. These they can tell more a story on a place and on that context.
I was wondering if you've ever done it or considered shooting video.
I was going to ask.
I did it a little bit, and for my Instagram, I still do it once in a while. But no, like I kind of gave up on it, doing it professionally so much, because it's like I like to do it, and it can have a very similar way of. I think I can use it in the way I look at photography and documenting places in video. But the problem is that, like, the sort of sequences and the moments you're photographing for still photograph versus video are kind of slightly different, and it becomes incredibly frustrating as a documentary photographer that you always think, oh, that moment I should have captured in video, or that moment I should have captured in a still, and you're always just in the sort of wrong moment or wrong setting. So I kind of gave up on that and just with photography. And then another thing is, with video, to do it well, like you always need a bit more setup and it's sort of team with sound and assistance with more equipment. So I do it once in a while for a small project, but it's not something I do very regularly. No.
You could just go around with a GoPro on your head, and it just does the work for you.
Yeah.
Your work is pretty interesting because you go and you photograph parts of the world where it's much more about the like very deep vernacular architecture, shelter, built environment, and then on the opposite side you go to like the most iconic building and metropolitan places. How do you manage going from these two ends of the spectrum within probably a few days apart?
What I was saying before, I feel like I photographed all these places, and also like what I photographed kind of before my architectural career in the same way. Like for me, there's not really a difference. Like the subject matter is slightly different, but the way I photograph and document these places and cities is all the same. And I feel like it's I've given this kind of amazing opportunity by architects I work with in these commissions to fly all over the world. Like it's just a pity if you're just there for those few days and not see much more of the other things. So like I've always kind of made a habit of when I'm in a part of the world to also work a bit on my own projects, more looking at the vernacular, traditional building techniques. So I feel like that those are ways also like which are important to see and bring out, that these places can still be an option for people to live in and take over.
Do you have a sense of how many buildings you photographed?
No.
It's got to be a lot.
Or how many pictures you have?
I mean, if you're traveling that much, you must have seen. I mean, have you been to like every country?
No, still far off. Probably.
Oh, really?
No, I had to. A couple months ago, someone asked me how many countries in Africa, or like if I've been to every country in Africa. I thought I was pretty close, but then like I counted, and it was like 25 countries or so. But there's like 47 countries in Africa, so I'm still like only halfway. So
only halfway.
Like I gave up on that.
Has there been a particular project that you photographed that was maybe the most challenging to capture?
I'm not sure. Like every project, like I don't know. Like of course, some places are maybe more complicated to get into, to get a connection with people. Maybe like one of those places, like the Torre de Vite, where I did with Urban Think Tank the Venice Biennale about a couple of years ago. Like this tower in Caracas, which became this a vertical city in an abandoned construction site. That took us, for instance, a long time to get access there, and then to photograph a place like that. These things are maybe more challenging, but I feel like once people let you into these places and you express that interest in a place like that, and like the way they build the place, and especially with this kind of the vernacular or the informal ways of living, like often, of course, they're maybe not the safest places, or like there's different challenges there. But like once you interested. You expressed an interest in how people created these specific places for themselves. They're also incredibly open and want to show you everything. They lead you around, and sort of one thing after another is kind of revealed to you. So I feel like I've never been in a extremely dangerous situation, which became difficult. So, like, in a way, like, there's always challenges, things, kind of work them out, and you figure them along the way.
So has there been a project that you've shot that when you look back was maybe your favorite? Maybe that's kind of a tough question, actually, but or like your favorite, or something that was very memorable for you?
Yeah. Now, of course, always kind of the last projects are also often the most favorite ones. This is a book I just did with Francis Carey. It's hard to see it probably here. It's called Momentum of Light. It started out of a question of this lighting manufacturer, Zumtobel, and they ask every year an artist or an architect to design their annual report, and it's a very nice commission. They have a budget, and they basically say, like, by August we need 5,000 copies of that annual report, and you figure it out. And as long as it has something to do with lights, so like in the past, people like Oliver Eliasson, Anish Kapoor, David Chipperfield, Liz Diller, and so on, have done these reports. And this year it was the 30th report which they were doing, and they asked me to do it. And I thought immediately to use it to photograph these very specific places in the south of Burkina Faso, which were for a long time on my list. Traditional adobe housing, mud housing. And so I asked Francis, who's a friend of mine, to come along. He knows the place, of course, very well. He was born and raised there. And so we traveled for like 10 days to these places. And it became this book basically on light and shadow and sort of the extreme contrast in a place like that, where during the day you have, of course, this abundance of light, the sun, which basically hits these structures 90 degrees down. But then these structures, which were all built in a way like to keep all the light and the heat basically out. So you step into these traditional houses, and they're basically pitch black from the inside. The first couple minutes you don't see anything, and your eyes sort of really have to adapt to it, and sort of slowly start to see the contours of things, and these spaces start to reveal itself. And I thought that would be interesting to see how these places are lived in nowadays, how they're structures. People started living in these structures hundreds of years ago, and they're still are there and are relevant, and people live in it. And I thought that would be an interesting story to tell and to show. Yeah. And then we worked with these graphic designers, Haller Broen, here from Amsterdam, the great young design couple, to design it, and we kind of went all out with the whole project. Like as you can see here, probably like half the book is printed on black pages, half on white pages. We developed with this printer here in Amsterdam this printing technique, basically in 7 printing plates, first 2 white, 2 silver, then cyan, magenta, yellow on top of it, kind of bring the light onto that black paper and kind of recreate the kind of patina of these interior spaces in there. And it's probably difficult to see here on the video, but it's that silver really brings a kind of shine and reflection in these photographs, where it's almost like the daguerreotypies in a way, and like they really change in the way the light conditions you look at them, to really transfer that feeling of these intensely dark spaces, and how you perceive them when you're there.
Yeah.
That became a very nice extended project. We all put way too much energy in the whole thing. So in the end, like when we were about to print, I thought it would be a pity if that's only that annual report and it would stay there within the company. So I asked Lars Muller also, like if he was interested to make an extended print run, a kind of printing technique which is usually for a publisher kind of impossible since it's so laborious and expensive. But once you're printing 5,000, it's easy to print a couple thousand more. So we made now also this edition, which is now in the bookstores with Lars Muller publishers, where it's just like the art section of the annual report in this book with Francis' fantastic drawings with it and a couple of essays by Francis.
What was the name of the book?
Momentum of Light, it's called.
Gotcha. Momentum of Light.
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, even through the video, we can tell the printing technique, printing on black, it looks very different. It reads differently. Yeah.
No, it was complicated to figure it out, but I felt like it's really sort of transferred to the viewer the feeling of these intensely dark spaces and that kind of patina of these mud buildings and how they reflect the light and transfer the light in there.
Oh.
And then each time, like you have these sections in the book where you transfer from the white to the black paper,
right?
And have these moments from inside outside.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So besides the books, I mean, do you still print some of your photography, or is it mostly on the cloud, digitally on screens?
Now, like for exhibitions, I print, of course. It's nowadays like it's all like digital prints, of course, and I don't print much immediately myself. Like there's printers who have perfect setups with everything which printed according to specifications in any size you want. So like that whole feeling you had back in the days in a dark room and the kind of magic moment where the image would come up, that's of course that's not there anymore. But I feel like a book or an exhibition or so, that's for me like really an end product of the work I do.
Do you think that your education or having learned photography maybe initially with film cameras was, crucial or influential to how you shoot today, or not so much?
I don't know, like of course, like with film, like you have to be super selective what you photograph, and especially like as a teenager, where I dumped all my money basically into photography and film and developing films, and like it was not the sort of unlimited shooting you can do nowadays. Of course, you had to be very selective what you photograph, and on your trip back, you always kept 2 more frames on your roll film available for that one shot you couldn't miss on your way back, and so we had to kind of plan. Other than that, I feel like digital also like really liberated photography. Like it's you see so much really great photography everywhere nowadays. It's for people, it became so accessible. Of course, like everyone carries a camera nowadays with them. But also like if you want to start in photography, like you have a digital camera, like the way like you can experiment so easily, and you have immediately a result which you refine and refine and refine. Basically that's what I'm doing also, like when I'm photographing a place, like you have something in your mind, like a way you want to document something, and then you sort of work towards that thing, and then unexpected things happen in between and so on. But like that's sort of way to refine your work while you're doing it, and you see immediately the effect of it, is of course like a tremendous asset.
Do you find yourself having a lot of issues with copyrights for your images? Because, with the digital world, things get shared and kind of dispersed, right?
Yeah. It's of course like nowadays with digital and the blogs and the internet, and so it's hard to really track that too much. Like, of course, if things get used commercially, like you're on top of it, but on the internet it's hard to really be on top of these things. So once it's out there, like that's it. Like copyright is the right to copy, as a lot of people say.
So, and then speaking of like refining, I was wondering how much post-production happens for you. Like, do you intentionally try and keep the photoshopping down to a minimum?
Yeah, totally. Like I don't do much more like as what I did before in the darkroom. You might crop it a little bit. You do a little bit of color correction, straighten a line or something like that, since you're shooting all handheld. But that's about it. So you try to make an image like as finished as possible in the camera. It only helps with the quality to do as little other work afterwards.
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of your photographs too are also like the final photograph that we all see is very natural feeling. It's not over processed. It's not. Sometimes you see photographs of architecture or anything else, and it seems to be 10 different filters layered on top of the image. But it doesn't seem like that. That's what you do.
No, I avoid that kind of thing as the plague. Totally. No, it basically comes straight out of camera with basically the things you did before in the darkroom, which you apply now to maybe bring the contrast a little bit back, the color balance, stuff like that. But I feel like for me it's still the kind of documentary photography I'm doing, and like not beautifying a place in a different way, or taking things away or bringing things back which are not there.
So what are some of the projects you're working on currently?
So still there's always sort of these books which are usually a bit longer term projects, which kind of sometimes develop over months, over years, and so on. There's the ad hoc finished buildings, more the publicity, PR photography once a project is finished, which keep going on. Another book I can show you here. It became a kind of big Bible. That was kind of 10 years in the making. Just came out with Taschen, and I did it together with this Dutch architect Bjarne Mastenbroek. You might know one of his buildings. He built this villa in Vals in Switzerland for himself, which is next to the Therme of Zumthor. Also here in the book, you probably recognize it. It's been probably in terms of my architectural projects, one of the most published projects. This villa he built, a kind of inside the mountain. I think a lot of his work also has a lot to do, like with the earth, with the connection of the building and the ground, and so we both have this interest on how buildings kind of are connected with the earth, with the ground. How sometimes buildings are literally made out of the ground, like all the, of course, the mud buildings and these very specific ways people used to build. So it kind of started out of the interest for both of us, and we kept kind of adding things to it over and over, and then it became this 1,400-page book, kind of
1,400? Did you say
on
1,400?
Yeah.
Oh man.
On all kind of examples of building with the earth and in the earth, like from traditional ways, like the Indian step wells, to like modern buildings, to and so on. So there's a number of these photo essays throughout the book on specific places. Here, like the Indian step wells, for instance, and so there's many more contemporary examples, and everything in between. So it's got a little bit out of hand.
Is there you've been to so many different countries, but not all of them. Is there a particular place that stands out in your mind as being maybe not your favorite, but like had some kind of impact on you, or a place that you adore?
Yeah, like I think like one of them here is in the book also, like it's in Ethiopia, these churches in Lalibela, which are carved out of the rock. So they were about 1,000 years old.
Wow.
And it's like most people know, of course, these examples from Petra, and so the rock-hewn temples and so. But these churches were vertically carved out into the earth. So it's kind of at the top of these highland mountains. Let me see. Look, here you see it well.
Wow.
These... they're 1,000 years old, and people started carving these rocks vertically down and kind of created space by removing materials, kind of the opposite way of architecture, with adding in material. Here they basically removed all this material, and in that way created space basically. And it's of course this immense planning of course, like at that time these buildings were built over a period of 100 years, so the people who started it never saw the end result. It's just these incredible spaces which are underground, like a whole landscape which is dotted with these pathways which are carved into the rock, where you go down into the earth, and then you enter these places. These churches inside are also again completely carved out of the rock, and it's this complete negative space, basically one solid mountain where you stand inside, which became this holy and religious space for people for over 1,000 years, and in a place which over the years has seen so much war and conflict, and like most other things in that part of the world have been destroyed over all these years. Like it becomes it's Christian, then it becomes Muslim, another religion, and things get destroyed and taken away. But of course this is like the most kind of permanent way of building, like it's literally the rock where nothing can be done to. So it's 1,000 years later, it's still there, and it was there during Ethiopian Christmas. So they use the Coptic calendar, so that's usually like sometime end of December, early January, depending a little bit on the year, where you have these thousands of pilgrims coming to the site, and where it still is so present there and fully in use, which is really incredible. And then the book has all these beautiful drawings which were made by Bjarne's office, which explain the projects in all different ways. Yeah,
that's crazy. Okay, so what was the name of the book and the name of the place again? Because people are going to want to...
So the book is called Dig It. You see it. Dig it. Building bound to the ground. So Tarshan published it. And this place is called Lalibela. It's in the north of Ethiopia. And it's these carved out churches.
I mean, I've seen structures that were dug into the earth, but maybe not ones like you showed that are so starkly... They're presented in such a straightforward manner. I mean... Like you're just.
How did you find out about this particular place?
Yeah, it's also like working with architects and traveling all the time. People know specific things about their countries and their surroundings and their inspirations. And I feel like that's these inspirations of architects also help me a lot in many different ways to come to projects and see different places. Like this is also an incredible example from China, the north of China, the Yao Dong Houses, and that was at a certain point like tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of people lived in these vertically carved down courtyard houses in that part of China. That was a very specific material. The earth was this loess soil. So kind of very soft earth, which is easy to dig out, but also stable enough to, once you dig it out, it stays there. And it was all these courtyard houses carved in. And then, when you're down there, like you have these structures, these rooms you enter in where people, still live. Nowadays, not so many anymore, but it's still like a kind of thriving community. A totally unique way of living. When you ask people like, why did you do that and went to all that effort to dig out your houses basically in the ground? They say like, for them it's the most logic thing to do. Like they say, we were poor farmers. We didn't have any money to buy materials. So the most logic thing for them was just to remove materials and create space. Like you don't need anything else than some labor. And they're incredible structures, an incredible way of living. And you see that whole landscape with it's all farming, little plots of land where people grow all kind of things, and then everywhere in between these courtyards which are dug out into the earth.
I mean, these are pretty elaborate spaces. For people who maybe are just listening, like you might assume that for folks who are going to carve out their home into the earth, that would be very rudimentary, but they're not. Like there's actually kind of urban planning, or whatever, land, larger neighborhood planning, and then there's decoration involved.
Totally. And I feel like there's also an urgency to really see all these different things in the same, like with Burkina Faso and many of these other places I go to. Like I feel that way of living is rapidly disappearing in all parts of the world. Like these structures, of course, they still need a little bit of maintenance, and although like people from the community do it. It's with their own bare hands. They don't need to buy any materials, transport anything. So it's a total logic thing to do. But all these communities, like the economics change a bit. People have a bit more money and all have this idea of modernity is corrugated steel roof, some cylinder blocks, or a high-rise somewhere in a bigger city in China. And the moment people move out of these places, and that maintenance is not done anymore, these places very quickly disappear also. Like these mud structures, they survive a couple of years, and then if you don't do anything to it, then they disappear. And you see that in many places in the world. So for me, that's also something like I try to see as much as possible while it's still there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I was going to comment that you've probably seen more architecture and built environment spaces than, I mean, for sure, way more than the average architect or the average person. And the shift and the idea of modernity and that kind of development has obviously been reaching further and further into more remote portions of the world. And so, I guess it makes sense that some of these places are maybe disappearing. Yeah.
And sometimes it's like pure government planning also. Like, for instance, Urumqi was this amazing mud city in the very far west of China, which was on my list for a long time. And then I finally went, and I found out that actually like 2 years before the Chinese government basically razed that whole part of the city. Although it was UNESCO World Heritage, they flattened it out of security concerns, so-called, and then rebuilt it out of concrete in the most horrific way, because they still thought it's a kind of tourist attraction, but it's of course also the whole issue there in China, in that part of China with the Uyghurs and the Muslim minority, where every trace of that culture they're trying to remove. Or another example, I was 3 weeks ago in Bangladesh with Anna Heringer, is a German architect who builds these incredible mud structures. She won the Aga Khan Award and many others for her work there in Bangladesh. But she works also in Western Europe, and now she's working on a couple of projects in Africa, and everything for her has to be pure earth, pure mud. So there can't be any sort of mix with concrete or any other material, and then also no firing, so no bricks are made. So it's pure, just compacted earth or rammed earth or just mud buildings. What she makes incredible 2 or 3 story structures there. And so we're working on a book with her on her work there. And then, we went around that part of northern Bangladesh, which has an amazing history also. People always built basically mud houses for themselves. All these villages are dotted with all these mud structures, or were dotted with these mud structures. But she hasn't been there also now for the last 2 years because of COVID and so on. And she saw an amazing change, especially the last 2 years, that so many of these structures have been all put down, and people built the most horrific concrete cylinder blocks, little huts, corrugated steel. And that's actually a program the government of Bangladesh really pushes forward. They sort of deemed that people who live in a mud structure are below the poverty line, so they need to be helped and be built a safe so-called house. So they're given concrete blocks, corrugated steel to build a house, in Bangladesh under the sun, kind of unbearable structures to live in during the day. Then, in a couple of years, that corrugated steel roof starts to have holes in it, starts to rust, falls apart, and people are have to buy that material as to be all shipped from China, from other places. So it's a kind of totally unsustainable way of trying to raise the poverty standard in places like that.
That's interesting.
Which is really difficult to see.
That's one of the most basic, it's one of the first lessons you learn in architecture school, is whatever you create has to be, at the very least, make sense for the environment and the climate, so it can withstand and be around longer than a year and a half. It's lesson number 1. But
of course you see in all these places, also that big commercial push is happening everywhere, and people are fed all that information, of course. Also, you can suddenly have a nice, perfectly straight wall and this concrete and steel door and everything else. It's very difficult to change that perception.
Do you see in more, modern buildings and built environment some sort of uniformity across the world of what's being produced right now in let's say the major cities and things?
Yeah, of course, 90% of how these cities are built these days they start to look more and more to each other, I feel but that's also really my drive for the projects I take on, the kind of architects I try to work with, and that there should be something very specific what anchors that building to a place and why it's there. And again, that story and just the kind of generic office building, which could be anywhere in the world, I usually refuse. But so yeah, there should be this other story why what makes that building be in that specific place.
Yeah. Have you ever turned down a project and said, no, this is, maybe you wouldn't tell them, but you think this is not interesting at all. There's nothing here that's specific to the place or whatnot.
Yeah, like that happens quite regularly, actually.
That's fair.
Also because my schedule is just way too full, and I have to, things don't fit in my travel schedule and so on. But that's also sometimes an excuse to make projects.
Well, actually, that kind of gets to a different question, which is: had you ever considered taking on like an apprentice or someone to train to? Let's say, this is not the right way to describe it, but, to expand your business in a certain sense. Not that you would do it for that sake, but like, have you ever thought about doing it?
Yeah. Like I've seen others do that. Like I feel like Esto, for instance, in the US, is one of those who really expanded with many photographers. But I felt like also really the quality of the projects went down and the photography went down. Like in a way, there's only a handful of really interesting projects happening at any point in time, sort of anywhere. So I feel like I'd rather spend my time and energy wisely than to have that need to train people and take on any kind of other project which I might not find so interesting.
I mean, I kind of wonder, this is more of a just general question, if something like that can even be transferred, that kind of knowledge, whatever specialness that you have that allows you to capture photographs in a unique way, if that can even be bottled up and, given to someone else.
Clones.
It's difficult. I just had a project like that where like it was more of a logistical reason. I really couldn't be there, but it was a project I really wanted to be there. And it was like, I've been trying to go for years and years to Iran. And like, of course, it's super complicated political situation, security situation, and so on. So I finally had this project, which I thought like, that could bring me there. It's this a new museum, Argo Factory, it's called, which is done by a young architect, which I knew from New York, and like he did it in collaboration with two architects, one in the US, one she's from Romania, Oana Stoenescu, and still travels around also a lot, and like they. And Ahmed Reza Fricker, the architect who basically initiated or did the whole project there in Iran. He was there in Iran, but the rest was all done remotely, basically also in the design and the building of the project. But then, so I thought like, I have now the right excuse. It was a really great project. It was an old factory which they transformed to this incredible museum. So I can go there. The client had good government contacts to get me like the right permits and visas, not to be there like stuck half as a tourist or as a journalist with all kind of different complications. So, but then like we tried to apply for visas twice and they got twice rejected, and they said like, basically, there's no way for you to go to Iran, and it's probably because of connections I have with the New York Times and other news organizations, which the Iranian government really doesn't let in. So I couldn't go there in the end. So then we found a young Iranian photographer, which I gave a kind of crash course over a couple of days on how to photograph. And we walked through the building on FaceTime, and basically, we worked together really to document the project. And it came out pretty well. And like it's actually now this month, I think, in Architectural Record, and will be in many other places because it's a really unique project. But sometimes, the situation really forces you into something like that.
That's pretty
wild.
That's pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
You're doing FaceTime to try and guide a person through. So I am curious, like, what were the things that you said in those FaceTime sessions? Was it like technical things? Was it perspectives to capture? Was it?
Yeah, like we talked a lot about the building, like the different uses. She was also more of a documentary photographer, so I thought like she kind of same. I felt the kind of similar background as me, so I thought she could really do that. But she also like didn't have any prior experience with architecture, so I really taught her some of the basics of architecture. Like she was much more into like very exaggerated perspectives and so to tell her also a bit more to focus on the life of people there inside, what was happening there, kind of be there, be present in these moments, and basically gave her kind of crash course, like what telling you like what I'm telling you on sort of my background and how I approach these projects, that became in the end this series.
So you could do a master class on how to shoot like Iwan Baan.
Well, actually, that cool. Kind of makes me wonder. A lot of the well-known or any well-known photographer, I suppose, but I'm thinking specifically of someone like Julius Schulman. Maybe you could say he has a particular kind of style or a signature to his photographs. Do you feel like that you have like a signature style, in quotes, or however you describe it, of your photographs?
A style, I don't know. Like I try to work in terms of a style, also like with what I see in front of me, and sort of adapt to a situation. But I feel like the way I like it's more kind of the kind of projects I probably take on, which define maybe my style. I feel like this body of work is a sort of thing I'm trying to show the world, the way I look maybe at the world and at people and how people inhabit these places.
Yeah.
Do you see some specific chapter in your career, like when you look back from now until back to when you started, do you see like some very specific moment where maybe your technique has changed or your interests have changed?
Evolved,
yeah.
I don't know, like I think like I feel like no, I'm probably still doing the same as what I was doing as a 12-year-old.
That might be a good thing. I don't know.
Advanced material, but no, like I don't feel like I changed. The way I look at things, in a way, like I'm in that sense a bit of one-trick pony, maybe.
But it's working.
I think it's interesting. You had mentioned at the beginning of the recording in a way that you had a certain set of interests or an eye for certain things having to do with people and reality, and that once you were beginning to be hired by architects, you didn't like just change everything overnight and to serve architects for whatever vision they had. There was something that you kept, that you stayed true to, which probably is what lends itself to creating the photographs you do.
Yeah, and sort of these. Yeah, there were of course these big changes in my career, so to say, like when I started working with Rem and other architects and so, but like I felt like the way I was photographing or so didn't really change so much, even in those moments, and it's more the subject matter which got really focused and specific.
Is there a particular type of project that you or place that you haven't photographed in or at and you're wanting to?
There's still a long list of these more vernacular places. I feel like I want to go to, especially since I feel they're getting more and more urgent. But no, there's still a lot to discover everywhere. I feel like I'm getting tired of it.
are half of the projects you do now, where you're commissioned by architects to shoot their projects, and then half of the projects that you do are more for yourself to go and shoot these vernacular kind of spaces and ones that are disappearing, or like what is the percentage, I guess?
Probably like it differences a little bit throughout the year. Moments where it's busier with commissioned projects, other moments where you work more on your own. So it depends. But on average, you can probably say like maybe 40-60% for the commissioned, 60% commissioned for the self-initiated or more longer-term projects, something like that. I feel like.
Oh, cool! Yeah. Interesting. I would have not known that. I mean, how would I know that? The final question for me, I guess, would be, what's next?
What's next? As I said, like there's still a lot, the sort of constant of new projects opening up places to go to. There's another edition coming soon out of the African Modernism book, which I did with Manuel Hertz a couple of years ago, where we visit these countries in Africa, which were all like in a specific moment in time, and they were all like their moment of independence, and as part of their independence hired often like foreign architects to build their new big public buildings, government buildings, universities, and so on. So this first book was on these 5 countries: Ghana, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Kenya, and Zambia, which we made this large series and very thorough documentation on all these architectural projects in that specific moment in time. It was all also like 60s, 70s, and so like kind of in the mindset of the Brazilian Chandigarh architects who could build really unique structures in these places. But we're often in these places also kind of largely not abandoned. People still completely live in it and took it over, but maintenance is of course a big issue in many of these places, and a lot gets demolished these days and gets replaced for like the generic glass boxes everywhere. So like it's another kind of project which we felt was pretty urgent to document these places, because there's never been really a good documentation on what was built during that period, and architects were given kind of incredible opportunities at that moment in time to define the image of these cities.
Interesting.
So we're doing a new version, a new edition of this book with a couple more countries, which is coming out next year.
Oh, nice. Wait, so for something like that, are you funding it yourself? Like, do you have to pay for your own travel to go out there and shoot, and then hope the book sells, or do you guys have a backer, or? It
depends. Like this first one was funded a lot through the ETH, the university in Switzerland, and different foundations and so on. But of course, like these are projects. You do also more out of my own interest, and then other things might happen to it, like exhibitions or artwork sales and so on. They're difficult to find a publisher who puts really money into these things up front, so you just go with it and do them.
Interesting.
Well, last question for me. How do you manage your jet lag?
That's the sort of constant
it's the mindset
of jet lag you're in, like it never really stops. But in a way, like I feel photography is really helpful in that sense, that like immediately you step into a new place, you're mostly outside, you immediately work with the rhythm of the day, sunrise to sunset, and like sun and natural light is the best remedy, I feel like, for jet lag. So to immediately step into the rhythm of that place, like, helps always tremendously.
Interesting.
Very cool.
Well, this went by very quickly. Thanks so much for coming on the show. This was insightful.
Very nice. Super, and I'm glad you were patient and this worked out in the end.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show by leaving a review in the Apple Podcast app. Or if you're on YouTube, then subscribe to our show, like the episode, leave a comment. You can also reach out to us on any of the social medias. You can also find us on Spotify.
And you can also text or leave a voicemail on the hotline, 213-222-6950. Email address is hello@secondstudiopod.com. And that's it. We're starting the year as well as we can.
Starting the year strong. Waba!
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, should have seen those hips moving around.
All right, everybody. Thanks again. We appreciate everyone listening, your continued support over the last 4 years. This is episode 269. It's crazy. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep going until we add at least 5 zeros to that.
Oh, shoot. I might retire.
We also plan on
that.
living for 300 years. We'll talk to you again next week or sooner. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.